Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion on open science and the geopolitical situation of the world right now. Today, I am thrilled to be here. I am the co-lead of the Open Science Group of the Global Young Academy, and we have some great speakers for today's panel. So starting from here, we have Mathijs Vleugel. Mathijs is the head of the Helmholtz Open Science Office. That's in Potsdam, close to here. Then we have we're all doctors. Oh, okay. Well, okay, so we have Melissa Harrison. She's a team leader of literature services at EMBL-EBI. And then we have Kamran Naim. He's the head of open science at the CERN. So I think first we can start off with a brief introduction about all of your backgrounds, because you guys have such interesting backgrounds in open science. And then we're going to kick it off with some discussion about different aspects of open science in the year 2025. Yeah, take it away. Yeah.
Cool, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you for organizing this panel. It's really a lot of fun to be here. I learned already lots of things this morning, so I'm looking forward to the next one day or so. So my name is Mathijs Vleugel. My background is originally in biochemistry, biophysics. After that, I worked in publishing for a couple of years and then joined ALEA, which is the European Federation of Academies of Sciences, where I cover topics mostly related to open science, research assessment, research integrity. And about a year ago, I took over the role of head of the Open Science Office at the Helmholtz Association. So we try to implement open science, move the cultural change towards open science forward in Helmholtz and its 18 research centers in Germany.
So hi everyone, Melissa Harrison. Is it working? Okay, cool. Thank you for the invite. And yeah, so I have an undergraduate degree in biology. And then after that, I've spent 20 odd years in publishing. So I spent a large portion of my career at the BMJ group, and then I moved to eLife when that was launched, and that's where I would say the start of my open science career began, where I managed the operations for production, and so got very involved in issues like JATS XML standards and kind of making all of the issues around open science, like open data, open software, open access, credit taxonomy, all these different things, making them more possible for machine readability. And then 4 years ago, I moved to EMBL-EBI, where I now run Europe PMC. So EMBL-EBI is the arm in the UK of the European Molecular Biology Laboratory, which was founded in 1974, and there's about 2,000 staff, 700 of which are at the European Bioinformatics Institute in the UK, just outside Cambridge, where I am. And so there we run 40 different open databases, open data resources, and Europe PMC is one of them. And it's been mentioned quite a few times already, but so that's a literature resource. And just so I came from eLife, where I was living and breathing open science and open access, and I thought it was a done deal. And then I came to Europe PMC, and I realized it wasn't quite so. So it's exciting times. Thank you.
So first of all, thanks so much for the invitation to speak, and it's an honor to share the stage with people whose work I admire so much. So I kind of got into open science through a sort of windy process. I worked in international development for a number of years and had been trying to essentially address the knowledge divide between the global north and the global south, and was working to help kind of either negotiate or optimize access for researchers in the south. It was about 2013 I realized that I was kind of working on the wrong side of the problem, and that knowledge should be a global public good. And so it wasn't about making subscription journals available for free to developing countries as a form of charity, but instead scientific knowledge should flow freely, and knowledge from the north should flow to the south, and we should enable contributions and value the knowledge from other parts of the world. So I decided to shift focus and to pursue a PhD in particularly in open access, and was particularly interested in cooperative approaches for open access, those that avoided commodified approaches to OA, like APCs and the big deal and things like that. And so having completed my PhD, I then was essentially recruited by CERN to run Scope 3, which is the world's largest open access cooperative. And there I have a broader portfolio which goes beyond Scope 3, looking at open science policy. So I worked to help establish CERN's first open data policy in 2020, an organizational open science policy, and really trying to formalize open science as an organizational priority.
Okay, well, you can see we have a stacked panel. I think we're going to start today by talking a little bit about data accessibility in the age of globalization. So I guess the first question that I'd like to pose to you guys is what boundaries are there to open data access in the age of globalization that you have found, or that are active areas of policy making that we can discuss? And I will start maybe briefly by giving an example. We have a lot of, so I'm a microbial ecologist. I work on equitable data reuse and data sharing of sequence data. I use EMBL-'s data sets a lot, and I study how they get shared. One of the things that we discuss a lot is the Nagoya protocols, which discuss the sharing of genetic information, of live information. And this is an area that really requires a lot of active development, even as technologies continue to exceed what the policy could have imagined, which is a topic that will continue to come up today. If you want to discuss sort of areas where data accessibility really finds the edge of privacy.
I'll just follow on with that. So with the kind of European Genome Pheno Archive, so EGA, in 2022, there was a federated EGA. So that allows different countries and different nodes to all be kind of collaborating on standards and having all the data available, but also protected. So it enables, countries to keep their data. Like this is, and when we're talking data here, we're not talking about kind of open science data in the way I traditionally think about it, but it's more about, human identifiable data. Mm-hmm. And it's really important that that has to be protected, and at a national level as well. But the thing is that being able to keep that protection and that necessity in there, but also enabling sharing of it. So when you think about things like rare diseases, it's really important that you have a larger data set to be able to do things with this. And the key issue there is around the protocols, because if everyone's developing things in very separate ways in separate areas, and then you can't kind of cross-collaborate on it or analyze it as kind of a single set, that's where the problems lie. So, the federated EGA being developed in 2022, there are the inaugural nodes, I've got them written down, we're in Sweden, Norway, Germany, Finland, and Spain, and Canada joining. This enables that level of kind of protection at the national level and protection of people, but then also people can access that data. And also the other thing is that the data access request is not managed by the database. It's managed by another organization, so it adds on an extra layer of protection. But the key thing is that by collaborating across boundaries and keeping the protocols the same, that's kind of what enables the sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, maybe at a more general level, I think we should not think of science as being open or closed. I think there's a large spectrum in between. And I think in the end, it's really about making informed decisions about how to share your data and who has access to it. So I think we have the technical solutions to a large extent. They are there, so we can do basically anything from putting it out in the open for everyone to use, to have registered usage, or to have like a real control environment where people go in, they analyze the data in the service, but never take them out completely, so only take some. So there's lots of technical solutions that we can use, but I think the issue is probably one step before that now. So how do we decide which data ends up where, which data gets which restrictions to it? And I think the real danger here to open science is probably that we become overly careful, that we say, you never know, I don't want to get in trouble, so I'll just put my data in a very secure repository with lots of restriction on it. I think we have to make informed decisions. We have heard this morning from the Leopoldina about these commissions being installed in universities. I think that's a great step forward. I think they should always inform the researchers themselves. They should be involved because they're the only ones who really know what is possible with the data. But I think we should be not like have a blanket solution to technologies with certain names and certain technologies with different names. They are not protected and others are protected. I think we really have to be looking at this at a case-by-case basis and see what is the smartest solution.
Yeah, thank you. I think I want to kind of go deeper on 2 points that you guys have kind of alluded to. The first is this idea of the importance of kind of guarantees to the data provider, to the data collector, as a fundamental part of doing these kind of larger tiered access initiatives. And so this is the first question, whether you guys have any examples of cases where maybe you've seen that providing guarantees to potential users might be very important. Otherwise, I have an example. And then the other aspect I wanted to ask, actually from Melissa's point, is you mentioned all of the countries that joined kind of the initial part of the program. And I wanted to ask you about the importance of quorum in setting up these sort of initiatives, because I feel like sometimes they're kind of social bandwagons even. So the initiative will succeed if there is enough people that believe in it at the beginning. And if there aren't enough people that join at the beginning, then there's not enough data, and then the initiative fails simply because there's not enough people partaking in it. And I'm not sure that normally we take deep note of this, but I wonder if at the institutional levels where you work, the notion of securing a certain number of organizations or countries to join a particular initiative has been a part of setting up novel regulations, novel programs, if you would like to comment on that.
Yeah, sure, and I think that's probably something that will come to you as well. So, I mean, EMBL is kind of an intergovernment organization. So there are about 29 member states. And so naturally having more kind of member states, more engagement is important. And like you say, if it's a lot of organization. So, you know, I mentioned the 6 countries that are involved. You need, I agree, you need that, and kind of more is more helpful. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, setting up is difficult, and then also I kind of linked to this. Maybe we'll touch on this later, but Kamran's point at the beginning about kind of the divide, the north-south divide, and so I know, like, so there are a kind of other databases whereby we've looked at kind of the, you know, data. sorry, whereby the data that's coming from kind of the global south and the global north and the usage of that, because there is a real fear about this, but actually usage was pretty even across. But anyway, that's another side. But I think also organizations like, the Global Biodata Coalition help with this, because it's kind of bringing together not just a kind of national level, it's funders and the database kind of organizations as well. And so I think that's a core point of it.
Gosh, I could talk about data for a while. So CERN is home to the world's largest scientific instrument and also the most prolific generator of scientific data on the planet. The LHC, when it is running, produces about 1 petabyte per second of collision data. And if you think that the LHC can run for almost 2 years at a time, that's a lot of data, and more data than there is computational storage on planet Earth to store it. So we have in place these really complex trigger systems that essentially have been using machine learning for the last 15 years to identify specific patterns in data and only capture those. Of the data that is captured and then thought useful for analysis, so we have a data preservation high energy physics group, DPHEP, that has kind of created this taxonomy or classification of different kinds of scientific data. So level 1 is the data that's associated with publications. I've suddenly turned into the Wizard of Oz. Okay. So systematically we make data that is associated with publications available through a collaboration with Durham University. We also release smaller curated data sets for education outreach purposes. Level 4 data, which is raw data, we do not release because it's just the volumes are just too vast and it doesn't really make much sense. But level 3 data, which is the data that our researchers believe has potential for scientific exploitation, is released systematically through the CERN Open Data Portal. However, we do operate on this notion of as open as possible and as close as necessary. And what our collaborations felt at the beginning was necessary was a period to allow them first, and when I say them, I mean these research collaborations of thousands of people who work in the 4 different LHC experiments, to first have the first pass at exploiting that data. It comes at huge national and human investment. And so right now what we have is a policy which says that data releases must start within 5 years. And so 5 years was kind of the consensus view that we were able to reach across the 4 major LHC collaborations, that they could start releasing data. And all data must be released within 10 years. That to me felt a little more conservative, and at least I would have liked. And one of our experiments, CMS, that's been pioneering open data at CERN, they release their data usually within 2 years of data taking. So the notion isn't that there's a 5-year embargo, it's just that releases must start within 5 years. What we also do is, when we think about releasing data, we think about, okay, well, what does this mean? Like, how can someone actually, yeah, sure, you can make a data set available, but how can someone really extract scientific value out of it? So in the CERN Open Data Portal, all of the data sets are accompanied by usually the software, the Jupyter notebooks, the computational workflows, and we've actually now even got a tool called Rihanna, where you can, on the cloud, instantiate an entire analysis using all of those component parts from the CERN Open Data Portal, and rerun an analysis without having to download any of the data onto your own computer, which could, as you can imagine, the volumes are quite big. So we have this kind of data visitation opportunity where people can rerun, reproduce, check the reliability of the data. And those are the kinds of approaches towards open science and on open data that we try and practice.
I have a few follow-up questions. When there was an analysis, when this group started releasing data faster, did it alter the types of researchers or people that were reusing the data? Is this a completely new initiative, or has there been some insight already?
The CERN Open Data Portal has been up and running now for 10 years, but the policy went into place in 2020 and is only really starting to accelerate now in terms of data releases. In terms of the use, there are a whole bunch of papers that have been published by scientists outside of the CERN collaborations that cite data that's been made available through the Open Data Portal. So we do see that there is increased scientific potential and increased opportunity for scientific exploitation of those data sets. Whether those groups have been shifting, that's not something that I have particular insight into that I feel confident enough to share on a stage. So.
Okay, so then I want to briefly ask, currently, what frameworks or governance mechanisms are emerging in Europe that you have seen that can kind of protect open science from becoming kind of this feared free-for-all that compromises, sensitive technologies, personal information, or national security?
I would generally say that, of course, limitations to open science is not a new thing. So we've always, of course, we've been dealing with data that has privacy concerns if it would be released. We have been dealing with data that still has commercialization or IP potential within an organization, so this is not something new. Also, the topic of research security, of course, in certain fields, this has been dealt with for a long time already. But what we see now, of course, that Europe is taking a much more cautious approach. I think 2 years ago, they published this list of 10 highly sensitive technologies that deserve extra protection. I personally don't think that this is the way to go, but luckily also in the council recommendations, there's a more nuanced approach now, where it's indeed more looked at as like a shared responsibility of the researcher together with the institutes and of course the national governments that should be helping to provide them with the information they need to make informed decisions. So I think that's a good approach that is being taken now, and of course this is also, we see this reflected also in funding programs. So researchers are being asked to already identify potential security risks. I think that's a good thing to be conscious about that, especially since the world around us is changing. I think the other factor, of course, that plays a role there is AI. We do not really know so easily anymore what our data can be used for in the future, as we thought we did like 10 years ago. So there's this much more diffuse space of what is possible, and I think it's good that researchers think about it consciously and are also encouraged to deal with these topics. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, this actually leads us to our next topic, by the way, for the audience. If you want to ask any questions, I will make a space for questions, also read online questions in between our 4 main topics, and we're now shifting to our next topic, which is AI. Thanks for introducing it. If anyone has a question now, feel free to raise your hand or send a message. I'll give you a few seconds. Otherwise, we can go right into AI. Okay, well, so I would say that a dream of open science, maybe a decade or even 2 decades ago, would have been in some ways what AI is doing now. And I will clarify a bit on this. The idea of open science broadly is that eventually all of this data would be accessible information about, just data that we have about the natural world and ourselves, information that we've gathered, interpretations about the natural world and whatnot. And then all of these would be neatly organized, classified, and made rapidly available so that one day, probably with the help of machines, we would be able to go through and sift through all of this information and make sense of it. And it seems that that has happened to a certain extent. and yet it feels extremely icky. So I would say most scientists or academics may not be so pleased with the way that AI has developed maybe over the last few years, even if we were already using it in some ways for a decade before to sift through data, to analyze complicated data and whatnot. The landscape has definitely changed. And so I was wondering if you would like to comment on how the dreams of data openness have kind of been leveraged or even coerced by the current AI revolution. In what ways is the way that the dreams that we had for AI sort of been taken, for open science has been taken by AI and taken maybe a slightly different direction or a completely different direction than were the original expectations of the open science movement?
I mean, I'll start with like the positive of the kind of dream to reality situation, if that's okay. So, so EMBL-EBI's AlphaFold. So I assume most people might have heard of it, but basically PDBE is a protein data bank, and there's so much data in that. That is all publicly funded. It's been pulled together. People submit it. It's all open data. And that, as well as data from other EBI resources, was the foundation for the models that were developed by Google DeepMind. So I think one of the things that we often talk about when we're talking about AI is this fear of like kind of big tech and the companies and all the resource they have and the kind of dichotomy of that against open science. And I feel like this is a good example of how it can work. So the collaboration between, the databases and the biocurators and the scientists at EBI with the kind of technology groups and the mass compute at Google DeepMind came up with AlphaFold, which is an open database. So that was one of the bottom lines for EBI as a supporter of open data, was that the results would be freely available for anyone to use without needing compute resource. So it's kind of really democratized. I mean, and there was I've forgotten the word, it's completely gone. The prize, really big prize. Yeah, sorry, how could I? You could tell on the spot, Nobel Prize that came out of that. But also, obviously with AlphaFold and the kind of all the predictions that have come out, that's really important for science and kind of will speed things up. But also from the commercial perspective, there's probably opportunities to monetize on top of that. And we're never going to be able to escape these sorts of things, I think. But I think, from the open science perspective, it's really important that that database is open and all of that is available to scientists. So that's me starting with the positive. I'll leave the others for...
Well, I mean, I'll start with the positive too, and because the AI revolution is here, and we can't be Luddites and sit and pretend like we can live in a different world. But at the same time, we need to demand accountability, and that means having, knowing what data AI models are trained on, and having some insight into the algorithms. The potential is huge, and so I think the dream, I think, is still very much alive, unless we allow it to get warped and killed and turned into a horror story by commercial interests like they've done with other parts of open science.
I'll start with something positive as well then. Firstly, I would like to, of course, say that AI itself is not good or bad. So it's like I would say with any other technology, it's depending on what you do with it and for what purposes. So I think that's really the key. Of course, AI has a massive potential when it comes to data science. It can also improve our data. I mean, we can use it to enhance metadata, to fulfill the FAIR criteria, etc. So we can actually create data sets that are highly usable and interoperable. So I think that's a great thing. I think the other great thing is that we finally now see a use of all this data that's being deposited. I think it has always been so complicated to find real case studies of where data that's being shared is being reused and brings actual value. We see this value being produced now, but I think we're all a bit uncomfortable that this value is being produced by big commercial entities. And I think especially what for research is probably one of the frustrating things is that data sets are being used, but there's no attribution of which data is being used. There's no compensation for this also. Data is, of course, used within a very different context, so it's not clear anymore where this context was from, and sometimes even misrepresented. So I think these are big challenges that we have to deal with. And then I think we come to what I see as the biggest risk. I think the risk is that we revert back to a state where we say, good, we don't publish our data completely open anymore. We keep it to ourselves or for non-commercial purposes only, so that we have more control of it and that we basically go one step back. I think that's the biggest risk at the moment there.
Yeah, so in a sense, going back to this idea of tiered access, not including any sort of AI mining policy in it, partly because maybe our hope was that everything would be mineable, maybe not to this extent, or maybe not this with this lack of transparency about what was being mined. I wonder to what extent, if you know of any initiatives, because you mentioned that the part of the slightly horrifying aspect of this is that AI is predominantly being run by companies, whereas a lot of the data sets, are run by NGOs or that receive governmental funding many times, or, and so to what extent are there initiatives within the EU, for example, to maybe, I'm not even sure, maybe from your European Open Science Cloud to sort of provide an alternative? Because right now, if we want to use a lot of this, we are kind of forced in a way to end up with these non-transparent models, or to make our own at great time and human cost. So yeah, I was wondering if there's any initiatives for that you know of.
I think that's a very complicated question. I think also, as we heard this morning, like these big tech companies, they've 100 or sometimes even 1,000-fold more computational power than we have in individual countries or institutes. So there's no way we're going to be able to compete with that. So I think we need to find a way in which we can cooperate well. I think AlphaFold is there a good example. Maybe we should also start to look at our licenses again. I think CC BY, CC 0, they were made for human use. They were not made for massive scale automated use. There are licenses being developed where the specific use by AI models or for training AI models is being specified. That could be an option. One could think of similar extensions for the CC license series, for instance, to have more guidance on that. What do we want our data to be used for, and to have the data owners and developers also more in control there.
I just wanted to respond about that, because I know that there is a lot of fear for researchers around the use of their content, their papers, and this idea that CC BY and CC 0 are kind of no longer fit for purpose. But what worries me is that by putting on a more restrictive license, the publisher owns the content and can sell that anyway to AI, so it doesn't protect the researcher necessarily. That is an option, but also you're closing it down from kind of academic reuse, and it's not just big tech that is investing in kind of AI models and building things. We're doing it at EMBL-EBI, and we had a recent Europe PMC team and the Open Science team at EMBL recently ran a webinar with Creative Commons, And, you know, there were quite a few examples of the different databases at EBI that are using the open data, and they're creating links between the data and the literature, and kind of finding more inferences. We do text and data mining that kind of supports disease discovery and all those sorts of things. And what worries me is that a kind of desire to clamp down on the literature being open is actually really going to only hurt academic freedom in the way.
Yeah, maybe to respond to that quickly. So I'm not proposing at all to label our data massively for non-AI purposes only. But of course, you can say, for instance, an AI non-commercial applications, or you can say AI, but only when it's cited properly or when it's placed within context, so that you put more of a context of how it's being used by AI rather than just blocking it down completely.
I would just respond to that with, and I totally understand where you're coming from, but like non-commercial, so the NC's portion of it. So EMBL-EBI has open targets, which is an open source and open data, but it's a collaboration, a pre-competitive collaboration with commercial pharmaceutical companies. So by putting the NC on there, that means that all of the work that we do to text and data mine that goes into the open, but it's kind of used by these commercial entities, wouldn't be able to happen. So again, there's a real tension here, because actually, you know, commercial interests, they help the ecosystem, and there are reasons there. But at the same time, by shutting out to them, it can cause unintended consequences.
Yeah, I agree. Okay.
Just one dimension I wanted to add is this. One of the risks that I think we're seeing in AI right now is this notion of like data colonialism around open data, and that there are, you know, power asymmetries that can be exploiting scientific data, where compute-rich regions of the world extract open data without enabling the benefits to extend to the rest of the world. And so in that case, I think, you know, we really need to be thinking about shared governance. And, you know, at CERN, we do everything through you know, collaboration and through cooperative governance approaches, ensuring that all of our partners benefit from the public investment that's made. So I think there are lessons to be learned around those kinds of models and around how to kind of govern the use of AI in ways that enables benefits to reach everyone and not just a select few.
Yeah, I would even flip that around, right? So first, I think maybe something that we're all sort of starting to get at is this idea that we're not really holding AI models to the same open standards that we hold the data that go into these models, right? So we don't really know what goes into them. And on the notion of data colonialism, when there's large asymmetries in the availability of data, this can also result in gross misunderstandings of what's going on at a global level, right? And we see this with biodiversity data for sure, where there's areas of the world that are essentially blind spots because the data is not available or it simply wasn't created. And when there is no transparency on the training that went into these models, problems that occur in these regions are essentially not problems at all because there's no data to cover that whole region. And we have this, for example, in Latin America, when there's pesticide use that has already been banned in North America and in Europe, it's considered a problem that is no longer there. And yet, the data that shows that is still a problem in a large part of the world is simply not making its way to these large global assessments. And if we are to train our models with the same sort of skew, my concern is that this becomes kind of the new reality, that there is no problem because there is no data. And so I think this is also a huge side of the problem with AI, is the lack of transparency in what went into making the sandwich. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to totally agree with you about that. But I think that, like, it's come out of an Elixir project. There is the DOME registry, which is kind of being built with regards to kind of open, like fair for machine learning. So like making sure that models are fair and the data's fair. And that is another reason why I'm so keen on keeping the open licenses for the open data and literature. Because if that's not open, you can't, and you've built a model on something that's not open, you can't share your data set because it's not based on open data. So you've already kind of cutting off at the knees. So and I would say the idea is that we do want open kind of data sets that have trained the models, and for the models to be open, and that's what we do where we are. Now, I do realize the commercial industry, it's different, but as much of that is open as possible, then that just does help with the transparency. And there are lots of efforts, kind of Fair ML and like I mentioned, the DOME registry, that are kind of trying to work on this idea, and also with regards to publications and things like that, so that when like machine learning is mentioned in publications, that it's all open and fair. But again, this is within the academic environment where you write a paper, because that's really important and that helps your career. Whereas if you're a massive commercial organization, maybe it's different and it will be closed, which is a problem, I see.
Yeah, this is interesting because whereas the FAIR principles are kind of ethical principles that are baked into general policies, the use of these these products for commercial purposes is something that really should be regulated much more strictly than the ethical rules, I think, that a lot of science is fueled by. And so I think maybe this is also a point of contention where we cannot really, the frameworks that we use normally kind of fail at this interface between science and policy because the ethics rules are simply not something that is so important. Yeah. Okay. Yes, I was going to say, do we have any audience questions? We have a couple.
Hi. I wanted to ask, what's your thought about the Creative Commons initiative of the CC signals in response to the, I mean, CC signals are an addition that the Creative Commons organization has proposed to deal with the fact that when the licenses were developed, generative AI didn't exist. OpenAI and all the rest of it didn't exist. And you know, things have changed the moment that generative AI run by commercial companies arrived and made a product generally available to all. That's where it all started. So they are now proposing these CCs, not familiar with?
Is it the signals?
The signals, the 4 signals. Do you think they're a good idea for scientific data? Because they are, I mean, they advocate them as something that doesn't really, doesn't imply a closure of the data. But some people actually don't think they are a good idea. So I was wondering if you have any opinion about them.
I have to admit, I haven't read them recently, so mine's really fuzzy, but I do remember discussing this with them, and because again, it's quite tricky because, as we've all said, the CC licenses were developed before AI, but also we don't, like, the legal side of what you can do is different based on jurisdiction. So in the US, at the moment, it seems that all scientific literature is fair game to AI. It's open, but in Europe it's very different. So I think it's good that they're putting forward signals and trying to kind of promote the fact that open is good, but I think it's just still really tricky because we still don't know where everything's going to land, and so the legal framework around this is making it hard for something like Creative Commons that should be kind of international, but the legalities is different in different regions. So I haven't really answered your question, but sort of. Thank you.
I would like to at least attempt with you and the panel to disentangle some of the many aspects, because I think there are many worries about data use for AI which come together now, and which I think where not everybody might be on the same page. So maybe as two brief comments. I mean, first, at least in Germany, typically data are not copyrightable in like tabular data, for example. So that would already not apply legally. Also, it has been commented that AI is intransparent as a bug. I think many would argue like me that it's also a feature. In any case, I think it's baked into the system. So I think that cannot really be framed, in my opinion, as a problem. But what I'm aiming at is, and my question is, I would like to hear your opinion, is do you see maybe a streetlight effect that, for example, now you're focusing on the discussion about whether data should be open for commercial entities with certain assumptions about what commercial entities are and how they operate, but maybe we actually have other worries where we can't do anything. But so we focus on the streetlight of where we are, where we can act, but actually if there are problems, maybe it's antitrust, maybe it's tax, maybe it's international collaboration, but I would argue it's not really an open science problem. It's not something that we can deal with or should deal with, at least not in these circles, but I would be curious about your opinions on that.
Data is copyrighted depending on where it's archived. Right, so depending on where you archive data, it may become copyrighted. So it's not the case that data is just not copyrighted. Open data depends on where it is put and under which license. Not in Germany.
Sure, but if there's any level of curation happening to the data, then it, of course, becomes, there's like a creative addition. So
if it's a table that's archived somewhere, the table, right? A number on its own is not. But the way that it is arranged, letters are also not copyrighted, right? But books are. Same principle. Not the same principle. Okay, not the same principle.
Do we need a mic?
Yeah.
There's quite a few people that are...
Okay, yeah. Let's start the discussion.
Huh? No. Nobody?
No? Okay.
As I say, I feel somewhat privileged to be working in a field where we license everything CC0 because we want people and machines to be able to exploit our data to the extent possible. But that's the luxury of working in high energy physics where there's no human association with the data.
Yeah.
I have one question. So we have just discussed that data becomes more viable for AI, it's used, and I think we get under threat in two positions. One thing is that it's getting more and more difficult to show how the data is used because it's kind of integrated into a machine and the machine is kind of acting. And there's the benefit out of this machine. This is one threat, and I wonder whether there are means how to deal with this. And the other threat is that the gap to commercial systems gets smaller. So funders may ask, if somebody else makes, let's say, something out of your data, why don't you? And then as a public institute, we may have to follow and find ways how to raise funding out of the solutions. maybe the disease target question with EMBL-EBI is the right answer, to pull companies in and work together with them and then get some funding back. But these two threats, well, it's threats, it's developments, I would argue, not necessarily threats, but these are developments which we have to face, I think.
We have some online questions from Roland Bertelmann of the Helmholtz Open Science Office. He says, it's kind of funny how many of these panel's topics have been under recurring discussions since 2005. And also that copyright and CC licenses generally don't apply to data at all. This is news to me because I've been asked repeatedly about the licenses for my data for a very long time when creating databases, where the data come from and how they are archived. So I'm fairly certain, maybe not on the numbers, maybe not on the individual cells, but a data collection. I'm pretty sure I'm not gonna push, I'm not a legal expert, I'm a bioinformatician, but it seems strange that none of the data is protected in any way.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, I think we're in a similar position to CERN, is that obviously with the exclusion of kind of human identifiable data, the databases use CC0 license. So, but again, I'm within the life sciences, so I don't know which field this is where the data seems to be quite differently licensed or not.
Oh, maybe I just wanted to add what, actually it was not my comment, Dagmar was the first one to say it, but because I echo it and I think it's important to the discussion, CC0 is also not a license actually. Yeah.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
cool. Okay. Yeah. So, okay. So if we have no more questions on AI and open science, we can move on to the third topic, which is open science for the global management of global problems. And we started talking about this. I started talking about it with a north-south divide, but I think, and also Kamran did. But I guess we can go a bit deeper into this. From your perspective, what is missing? Because there still are strong north-south divides in many aspects of open science, right? We see it in publications, which we'll get into at the end of the session, but we also see it with data availability and also data reuse. And so what is missing, right? When data is made available, what is missing? So I was wondering if you wanted to comment on where you feel the next big change needs to happen to really enable more equitable open science globally.
Yeah. Okay. So just, I mean, open science requires infrastructure, and infrastructure requires resources, and not all regions of the world are equally resourced, plain and simple. So investing in regional capacity, data nodes can help ensure participation from all regions of the world. At CERN, we operate a worldwide LHC computing grid, which connects, it's like a federated system which connects research institutions around the world in order to be able to share data. That's a very rare example in high energy physics of how, you know, our intergovernmental model with shared governance can divert and support resource allocation in parts of the world that these kinds of things are achievable. But yeah, I mean, fundamentally, this is a resource issue. obviously we host, one of the motivating factors for us hosting Zenodo is to allow researchers from parts of the world that do not have the capacity to run and operate their own institutional repositories to be able to have a place and a home for their data and to make it available. So those are the kinds of things that we try and do to level the playing field, but there's a lot more to be done.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So I think we need more inclusive infrastructures, more inclusive governance internationally of data. Of course, we have been very focused on the US for good reasons in the past decades, which means that lots of our data infrastructures are based in the US or in other Western countries, which also means, of course, that these infrastructures follow Western European norms and standards and priority setting. So I think we need to get to a more inclusive approach there. I think we also have opportunities there now. So I don't only see what's happening in the US as a completely negative thing, but I think it also opens door for us to develop an infrastructure, a global research data infrastructure that's not specifically focused on a couple of partners, but is becoming more diverse with indeed hubs in different countries that also allows the Global South to participate and to become important partners in this as well.
Yeah, I feel that it's very difficult for me to talk about this because from a kind of personal point of view, I read a lot of social science books, and so data feminism, the AI compass, and the risks associated with with data being taken and kind of not shared. But I think also this is just happening to all of us constantly. So, you 5% off if you give your data. Here we'll give you a deal if you sign up to our loyalty card. All these things, we're all selling our data all the time to these big commercial organizations. So it's not even a kind of north-south divide. It's just like it's just happening all over the place. But yeah, the examples that I sort of ballsed up a bit earlier was the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. So you were talking about that, and it's the digital sequencing information. And one of our colleagues, there's a group that had funding for this, and that what they were doing was they were looking at kind of use of this data and where it was coming from, and showed that it is being used in the Global South as well as the Global North, but it's a complex picture. And I think that's the issue here, is that we can't just kind of say, Global North is coming in and stealing data from the Global South, and I think from the humanities areas, there are things such as like language, and there's a real and there's been a lot of kind of protection in, for instance, New Zealand, of like protecting their kind of national languages and things. But there's a real tension, because if you exclude your data and your information, that will mean that models that are built are biased or that people are going to struggle to build for you. So, and I don't have any answers here. It's just something that really bothers me.
I think the answer is co-creation. Okay, yeah. Right? So like involve global stakeholders in processes, or how you, processes and policies for how you index, share, generate data. Co-creation is a solution. Open science is something we need to build together, not imposing solutions that we develop on ourselves on others.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So like APCs and all that kind of thing is a Global North issue. And again, it's like the bucketing people. It's like, let's talk with each other, and everyone talk, and everyone have a seat at the table. That's the only way.
Yeah. So going back to this issue of infrastructure, I will mention we recently conducted a survey across Global South bioinformaticians, and we found that 69% of them had engaged in a collaboration with someone from the Global North only for the purposes of using their computing infrastructure, which is really sobering to consider because it's not a collaboration in the same way that we think about it. It's not an intellectual collaboration. We had confirmed that they actually had capacity intellectually to do all of the work. It was really just about the infrastructure. And in that vein, I wanted to bring up this trend towards cloud computing services and the usage of cloud computing services, because this is something that is becoming, more common, not in the global north or in the global south, but just generally. But it does impose limitations differently depending on the budget that one has. So I was wondering if anyone would care to comment on, any sort of ideas about cloud computing services, or, kind of where the future of these infrastructures is going, or how to move these infrastructures forward, because cloud computing services were promised as a way to give people access, but again, through third parties. So if you wanted to comment on that.
Didn't AWS go down last week and bring loads of, okay, anyway, that aside, all right. I agree, it gives scalable kind of options for people, but there is also that risk that you move to the cloud with certain costs, and those costs are going to change drastically. And I think when we're talking about the scale at which, well, CERN is so much bigger than us, but even like EMBL, the scale is, it's going to be prohibitive to move completely to cloud probably anyway, but let alone that risks of dealing with a commercial entity and what could happen. And I think that's as far as I can go. It's risky, but I understand why some people do it. And if you're talking on a smaller scale, I think it is an option that does really help you.
So we've been having conversations with bioinformaticians from around the world, and we've been starting to hear actually the horror stories of shifting to cloud computing services when the budget is not unlimited. And so it's become really clear that this is kind of a wolf in sheep's clothes, right? It has happened in Denmark. Copenhagen University recently shifted to cloud computing services with a fixed budget, and within a very short period of time had exhausted that budget, either because a student made a mistake or, and then they were out of computing access. And so now they realize the importance of having their own infrastructure, which kind of goes against this idea of centralizing all of the resources. But I do think that there's an important lesson there for the extent to which who is in charge of the centralization matters, right? So just wanted to bring that up.
And also just to add to that, the move to cloud all of this cost, time and resource in your tech teams, it's not like, overnight it's done. And then moving back, it's a lot of work and planning that goes on.
Yeah. Okay. So how? Let's see. How do I say this? How can we ensure that these limitations really, I kind of wanted to ask, do you think it's the responsibility of an organization like the UN or something like this to start investing in these infrastructures, right? Or to start considering the availability of these infrastructures at a more global scale for strategic purposes, right?
Well, I'll just say that I don't think it's necessarily the role of the the UN to be investing. I think what the UN can do and is doing is convening the discussions around how to address some of the barriers. And I think the Open Science recommendation that UNESCO helped develop has a lot of those values enshrined within it, and a commitment from countries all the world to develop collaborative solutions. So yeah, I think just, one of the things that we have to avoid, which unfortunately is, we tend to not really learn from history, is to think that, we have a solution that works really well for us here in the North. This is the solution for the rest of the world, and we do that without really understanding local constraints, context, culture, essentially trying to impose solutions on others rather than treating researchers, scientific communities from the South as equal global partners with as much to contribute as we have. And actually, for anyone in this room who has worked in sub-Saharan Africa or in Latin America will I'm sure, confirm that there you meet some of the brightest people, because they've had to innovate and operate and be successful in a global system that imposes values of research assessment from the global North on them, and they have to innovate in ways that others don't, and have to come up with their own solutions. So I think really what we need to do is to have the ability to convene and develop cooperative solutions that treat people as equal partners.
Yeah, I want to completely agree with that. So I think we should be very careful of taking another kind of neo-colonialistic approach there. I think we've made enough of these mistakes, trying to think what is best for the world, then build it here, and then let countries that don't have the means themselves benefit. So I'm talking about, for instance, trying to negotiate subscription discounts or giving waivers to countries that cannot pay for APCs. I don't think this is what we mean by creating an inclusive approach. An inclusive approach should benefit everyone, which also means like a structural investment in building these infrastructures in other countries. So not just having them here and letting others benefit, but really do that together. Yeah.
I'd just like to add so I like to use the term designing for dignity, because, like you mentioned, waiver programs deny researchers in the South their dignity because they essentially have to request charitable consideration. Those aren't the kinds of systems that we should be building. We should be building equitable participation.
Yeah, and they require more work, right? It's an extra step that someone who has probably had to make a lot more concessions along the way to get the resources they needed to do the research in the first place. One last thing, or one more thing that they need to now do in order to be able to access the same resources that their colleagues elsewhere didn't need to go through these extra steps for. That's actually an excellent segue into the last section of the panel. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them now. Any questions? Okay, is that a hand? Or is that just a pen? Okay, cool. Could have been either. Okay, so the last section of today's panel is about globalization and the current state of the scientific publication ecosystem. And we started mentioning APCs, right? And the UN, and I would like to bring up the UNESCO recommendations on open science and their effect on the publishing ecosystem relative to the initial hopes. And the initial hopes were the true, pure open science ideals, I believe. And last year there was a lot of reckoning with the outcome of the UNESCO recommendations as they put together their principles on monitoring open science. And what they found out was that actually what had happened in the years since the recommendations initially came out was that open access through APCs had skyrocketed, even at the cost of other models that are much more in line with the pure principles of open science, like diamond open access, that were flourishing in the global south and actually may have divested funds from things like diamond open access towards the standard APC model. So now we have a lot more availability of open publications, but the costs have been tremendous. And so I wanted to get that part of the conversation started. I'm sure that you have some comments right off the bat, so no questions.
Sure. So I think that we witnessed the commercial enclosure of scientific knowledge in the second half of the last century. We witnessed commercial consolidation, the 5 big publishing companies taking control of most of the major academic journals. We witnessed a serials crisis in the 1990s. And as a response, the open access movement was supposed to turn knowledge into a global public good. And what did we do? We allowed for the rise of an APC-based model, which is not based on a public good. Essentially, all you've done is that you've now turned the article into the commodity. So we have ourselves to blame. And now I think there's, the rise of the diamond open access movement, I think, is kind of in response to this lesson that we've learned. Sure, yes, we've learned a lot. More content is open now than ever. That's a huge benefit. However, it's come at a huge cost. And that is also because we've allowed for much of it to remain in the control of corporate entities who have a motivation primarily to deliver value to their stakeholders, to the shareholders, excuse me. And as long as that happens, we're not going to have global commons if they continue to use scientific knowledge as their principal commodity. I think there's a wonderful place for them in the ecosystem in providing services and competing over services, but scientific knowledge itself should be free and a public good. So I feel like we're learning those lessons now. It's taken us 20 years, unfortunately, but yeah, I'm very encouraged to see more of a movement towards diamond.
Yeah, when people from the outside come in and look at the publishing ecosystem, the scientific publishing ecosystem, I think they're quite shocked. And often you hear people, again, from the outside who go, oh, look what happened to Blockbuster. It used to be on every high street, and then people changed to love film, and look at what's happened to the music industry and what Spotify's done. All these things, I think that there is so much within the way things are framed and the way scientists are measured. And I mean, impact factor, don't even get me started, but that's still being measured and it's still being used. So it's in a way, it's quite mind-boggling how we're going to unpick all of this so that publishing in a diamond open access journal without an high APC is okay. And I think that this is the other issue, is that everybody has a part to play. So like, funders, institutions, the scientists themselves, publishers as well. It's like actually changing. And so we've had DORA, we've now got CORA, we've got the United Nations, we've got all these policies and all these things happening, and we've got open science, but it's like, there's just much more to unpick, and all institutions need to stop measuring by, impact factor and measuring by different outputs and not just the research article. And so I think that's where it is quite a complicated picture. I see things happening and there is progress, but it's not quite at the speed we'd like. And I think that's how things like APCs have just run crazy.
Yeah, I think these two things. So we have to think about how we assess researchers, looking at the content of what they publish rather than where it's published. I think that's the first step. I think we also as research community can make steps there. We can decrease these dependencies ourselves. For instance, very easily by not looking at impact factors anymore, by not looking at glossy publication venues anymore, but looking at what is being published. I think we can do things ourselves there when we recruit people, when we evaluate people at every level there. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, of course, we need to invest structurally and sustainably in community-based infrastructures. It doesn't help when it's all project-based, when we fund diamond open access journals for 2 or 3 years, and then maybe it's gone again, and expect the community themselves to keep running this for the long term. So we need structural long-term investments there as well to take this serious.
To get to structural long-term investment, we need disinvestment. Because so much of the money that's in the system is tied up into commercial agreements, which are not, which end up becoming more expensive, are not serving the community in the right way. And so there is money, but it needs to be diverted.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. So like Diamond OA, I love it, amazing, it's brilliant. But part of the problem that I have for myself as an indexer, and I'm sure a lot of Diamond Open Access journals will say this, they're not indexed where they need to be. And again, it's a problem we have with Global South journals, they're not, and so, but, you know, and also full text, we want full text. An indexer like me needs full text XML. And it's, you know, so there are blocks there. But I would also say that there are opportunities there with AI. So we've been worrying about AI here and all the kind of negative impacts it's going to have in this world. But actually, for this sort of ecosystem, it's a brilliant opportunity to really make publishing more equitable and more easily. So there's a real opportunity there with the right investment that can really change the way things are happening.
Great. Now I'm going to bring in a cynical side because this sounds very hopeful. But we've had a lot of the technology we needed to make this happen for maybe 5 or 10 years, right? Not necessarily the AI aspect, but you know, if we think about how preprints in terms of infrastructure have moved over the past decade, they've fundamentally changed how we see the publication process, right? They've added a step. I would argue it's been generally beneficial for science, and yet we don't see that kind of progress in the publication ecosystem itself, in the units from which our evaluations come from, for better or for worse. The part where the peer review maybe happens and afterwards. And so I wanted to ask you guys to comment on why this divide between the speed with which everything that happens before peer review has developed and the speed with which what happens after the submission of a scientific article. Yeah.
I just want to say that peer review is happening before in preprints.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
you know, because I know that there are communities on Zenodo doing this. So from the life sciences point of view, so Europe PMC, we have 47 million objects within the database. And we've been indexing preprints for a while now, and we've got over 1 million now, which is great. But you know, when we're talking about comparative numbers, that's quite different. And then we're also investing in the kind of peer review, preprint peer review. We're calling it reviews because, you know, and the number gets lower. There is a lot of activity in this area. It's all grassroots and it's all different places. I think also part of the issue there is, so I would say Core Notify is a group that is trying to provide infrastructure in this way. Crossref also has the DOI system, but there's a tension there as well, because from a Global South perspective, Crossref costs money, Core Notify doesn't. From an index perspective, like my own, it's like I need systems that kind of work and are standardized, and that's where maybe the tension I see is that preprints is a kind of a revolution. We can do all this stuff, but again, that infrastructure needs paying for. So it may not be full text XML, you know, because that takes more. It might not. It also doesn't have necessarily all the metadata, all the open science metadata that is being kind of systematically tagged within research articles. So I don't like. As a former publisher, I put so much effort into like the structural XML, and so it was really good. eLife's got amazing metadata that goes everywhere, and it was very promiscuous. Now, okay, not every publisher is doing it, but they do have that ability, and there is a lot more structure. So there is that tension as well, and they've also kind of built the ecosystem, like Crossref was started by publishers, ORCID by you know, that sort of thing. So sorry, I think I'm going off on my bandwagon here, but I jumped in quickly because it was like peer review is happening on preprints, and it can happen, but it's just not happening at the kind of organized level. It's more of a grassroots level that needs supporting, and so it's that kind of infrastructure and those changes that need supporting.
Cool. Then I have another question about sort of the hopefulness or hopelessness of the situation with publishing. We've seen kind of this example of, okay, we must make science open, therefore these large publishers adapted to sort of fit the new regulations. And so I was wondering if you could comment on how we might move forward from basically a rat race with publishers developing policies that there are loopholes for, right? Because essentially the idea was not to increase the revenue of the publishers when the notion of open publishing and open access started, right? So how do we get around this? Project Deal, similarly, I would say this was not the original vision. And so how do we get around this notion or this situation where policy is developed and these companies that are so powerful because we've given them so much power are able to sort of skirt around them and still become even more embedded in the scientific ecosystem?
Yeah, so first maybe briefly, so Project Deal has been developed to increase the number of open access publications in Germany. I think one could say that this goal has been achieved. So of course there's other goals which we're talking about now. I think when we talk about open access via diamond models, then it's about us taking control in the research community. There are lots of diamond open access journals around already. We need to support these, professionalize these, and make them like a core part of our publishing ecosystem. So we can do that independent of the big publishers that are there. We can build up an alternative, but it does require us to invest probably. And of course, it does require us to get these financial resources also from other places where we invest them now.
Co-creation. You were talking earlier about co-creation of policies, infrastructure, and things like that. We have to work together. It's like rather than big evil publisher, open science over here, it's like we really are. If you look at mission statements, they're all pretty much the same, apart from maybe the shareholder aspect. But like I think that's the thing, is that we have to work together on this, because we're never going to get anywhere if we start kind of exclusion. But anyway, it's your.
I'll just say that I think we're seeing some encouraging shifts. So I think obviously the attention towards diamond, and I'll just echo the sentiment that Matthias just raised. I think Open Research Europe is in the new phase it's entering is a particularly interesting case where now multiple research funders are coming together. They are transitioning away from a proprietary platform to an open source platform, and transitioning away from a commercial provider to a nonprofit member of the academy to run the infrastructure. So I think we can build the solutions. We have the know-how, we have the technology within the academy. It's just a matter of putting our money where our mouths are, and building solutions for ourselves. I think the publish, review, curate model I think is also super interesting because what it is allowing and actually eLife pioneering that at huge expense to themselves and the loss of their impact factor and impacts on submissions. But I think what it demonstrates is that there's been an existing hegemony of certain players that have controlled scholarly publishing through different systems, including the indexing systems, that have reinforced systemic inequities that are not good for humanity and they're not good for science. And so maybe the time is for us to take matters into our own hands and build solutions ourselves.
Yeah, thank you very much. And with that, I would like to take any questions from the audience. Oh, there's one over there. There's two.
Ich mach mal schnell. Okay, thank you for the discussion. I would agree with almost everything you say, and I have a two-part question. So the last remark you make about taking matters in our hand was my first question. So you all said we have an incremental change on the way to get more open access, and that is why I would ask you if it's the right way we are on, or do we need a completely different approach, something disruptive, revolutionary, or whatever? I don't know what, but I think we are 20 years or 25 years doing this open access thing now, and connected with this is my second question. Do you think that people very much enthusiastic or engaged for open access are getting frustrated and give up because nothing or not much is really changing? Or how could you prevent them to lose their hope and keep fighting for, let's say, openness, more open science?
So you can put me high up on the list of people who's frustrated with having the exact same conversations around open access that we've been having for 20 years. I find it extremely frustrating. But like I said, I think there are encouraging signs now, particularly coming from the funder community that people will follow the money, and to see that funders are now more interested in investing in community and in community-based infrastructures, I think is hugely encouraging. They're encouraging diamond open access. So I think that signs of hope are there. I think, and again, every conversation that we've had on open access for 20 years always comes down to problems of research assessment. And when we're talking about research assessment, we're talking about research culture. When we talk about cultural change, I hate to say that cultural change typically happens one funeral at a time, but I don't want to say that it's not going to happen in our generation. But Quora, I think, and I think Dora and Quora are particularly interesting because they're now these systemic global alliances that are working on shifting assessment policies, and unless we do that, we're not really going to see open science achieve the scale that it needs to. I think, I don't know, Dagmar might be able to clarify on this point, but FWF in Austria are now also recognizing the open peer review contributions that researchers make in open peer review journals as being as part of their research record. And I think those are like small things that can be done. Like Mathijs was saying, they're little things that each of us can do within our own spheres of influence that can help shift matters and that can help shift culture. And along with organizations like eLife taking a stand against large commercial indexers. They're paying a price for it, but I think as a community we have to put our support behind people that are taking a principled stand against some of the perpetuators of systemic problems. So I think there are things that can be done. Hopefully we can all pull together and support one another in manifesting the change.
I will briefly add that ORE is probably a very large sign of change, Open Research Europe, because of the quorum. I really do believe in the importance of quorums specifically for changing the way that we do publications. Up to now, most of the initiatives have been very decentralized, and I think specifically publications, in order to really change, do need to be changed in a centralized and coordinated manner, so that these large publishers cannot react to each measure individually, because it's cost all of us extremely high amounts of research funds when this happens. So ORE being well-funded, being open source, and being having the backing of several countries at once is huge, because publications work like the stock market. You publish where people say is good, essentially, and you have trust that that will be good for your career and that will be well read. But there's internet. There's really no reason why one thing should be well read or not these days.
Just to add, I think that this coalition of funders that have gotten behind Open Research Europe, I think this quorum, I think is particularly impactful because it's going to change dramatically the eligibility of authors to be able to publish on the platform. And if those same funders can implement the kinds of changes, the policy level changes within their countries and communities and spheres of influence that recognize open contributions and aren't necessarily evaluating people on the impact factor of journals in which they publish, then we can start to accelerate towards an open future.
One brief question here, and then, yeah, the last question.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for your talk. So my name is Rasmus Andersen. I work with Science, AAAS. And one of my things, so Science is like a zero-day green OA publisher. And one of the ways you need, one of the things you need in order to get green OA publishing working is a network of repositories. So last year, one of the things that I did was reach out to repository librarians, repositories in different parts of the world to ask what are the developments going to be. Science needs these repositories to work and work well, work together maybe even, in order for that to be like a way to access science articles for people that don't have access to the version of record. What we learned was that there's not a lot of activity going into functionally making this better than it is today. There are like APIs you can download for your browser to find repository versions in the different various places. And we did some we looked into how much traffic different science articles that were in repositories, green repositories, worldwide got. There was very, very little. And I think we were sort of talking with researchers as well. We learned that, that instead of trying to find like researchers that don't have access to science articles, instead of trying to find a repository version that they can use, like accepted manuscript, they would much rather go to Sci-Hub and just find it like in sort of, black open access, if you could call it that. So I guess my question to you, you were talking a little bit about it before, but my question to you as a group was to talk about repositories, green OA. Is there any things that can be done, are being done in order to make that easier and make that also something that researchers and authors, first of all, want to deposit at, second of all, also want to find content at, where if they don't have library access, why can't we make green OA like much better?
I mean, I think we certainly can. I think one of the questions is about kind of the quote-unquote version of record, and maybe science should be looking at ways of making that open. But at the same time, I'm really encouraged to see foundations like Gates and HHMI moving towards a fully green open access policy. Because I think preprints have been the solution. They've been around for a while. Preprints are the mechanism of communication of new science within high energy physics and have been that way for decades. If you ask a researcher at CERN what they read, they will tell you that they read the archive every day. They don't go to any of the major journals. The journals there are there as a prestige vehicle for the research that they produce. And do we want to be paying for prestige? At least I don't. And I wouldn't want public money being used for, like a Gucci bag or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. So to me, I think there are better ways of investing our money in public and open infrastructures, and I think fully green policies are an encouraging way moving forward.
Okay. Well, with that, we conclude our session. We'll all be around if you want to talk to us. I want to thank you all for being here today and discussing these topics. Yeah, and I think now we are on break.
Yes, thanks again from my side also to all of you. So we will shorten the break a little bit. We'll be back at 4:05 p.m.